Mobilizing for Africa's Development, a Pan-Africanist approach. We have two speakers today, Dr. Yaka, founder of Revival of Pan-Africanism, and Dr. Jika, who is a student from Howard, and she is also a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. She's going to be the first speaker. So let's give her a welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good. Okay, so today my topic, I'm going to talk about scientific socialist mode of production in Africa's development. Since I think we're good because it's actually kind of bright green. Okay, so my agenda today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what is the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We're going to define development. I'm going to look at Africa's development challenges, briefly talk a little bit about scientific socialism, link scientific socialism and Africa's development, and then, of course, we'll have any questions at the end. So what is the All African People's Revolutionary Party? The All African People's Revolutionary Party is an international Pan-African political party. It was called for by Kwame Nkrumah in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare in 1968. So he basically recognized that having these individual heads of states and or these sort of top-down hierarchical governments was not the right way for Africa and African people. And he realized that really there needed to be some level of mass mobilization in order to achieve Pan-Africanism. So in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, he talked about forming the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the All African Committee for Political Coordination, the All African People's Revolutionary Army. The first work study circle was formed in Guinea with Kwame Ture, and as everyone is familiar, after the coup d'etat in 1966 February, when Kwame Nkrumah was on his way to Vietnam, he then transitioned and went to Guinea and was co-president with Sekou Touré. Our objective is Pan-Africanism. We identify Pan-Africanism as a total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. And of course, that means that Africa is absolutely primary and at the center of our work as a political party, and it really should be at the center of all of our work, regardless as to where we are. So we say, when we look at liberation, we're saying we want to be liberated from both external and internal enemies, especially imperialist nations, corporations, and individuals. We want to be liberated economically, politically, and socially. Unification. African people worldwide must unify in order to secure our freedom and liberation. And then finally, scientific socialism, applying socialism to different geographical locations from a scientific perspective. So when we say development, a lot of times we talk about development and we think that Africa is absent of development. Africa is not absent of development, but I want to remind us of a quote that Walter Rodney said specifically about development. He said, development in human society is a many-sided process. At the level of the individual, it implies increased skill and capacity, greater freedom, creativity, self-discipline, responsibility, and material well-being. He went on to say some of these are virtually moral categories and are difficult to evaluate depending as they do on the age in which one lives, one's class origins, and one's personal code of what is wrong. However, what is indisputable is that the achievement of any of those aspects of personal development is very much tied in with the state of society as a whole. So Walter Rodney is saying that our personal development is tied in with the state's development, which is tied in with the society's development, which goes right on back to Pan-Africanism. If we want to achieve anything in regards to development, we have to understand that our individual development, our individual well-being is completely connected to the African continent, and we must be pushing Pan-Africanism. He also said, and a lot of times when we speak about development in Africa, we pretend as if Africa is not developed. We pretend as if Africa is not moving forward as we speak, even with the ridiculous conditions in which Africa is and African people have endured. He says, every people have shown capacity for independently increasing their ability to live in a more satisfactory life through exploiting the resources of nature. He said, every continent independently that participated in the early epochs of the extension of man's control over his environment, which means in effect that every continent can point to a period of economic development. So again, I want us to go back to when we talk about development, we talk about development and we talk about Africa's development, and Africa's development is currently, and in the past, Africa's currently and in the past not without development. Like Africa is developing. Africa may be developing slower than we want Africa to be developed, but Africa is developing. Underdevelopment is defined generally as a comparison to developed nations. So when we say Africa's underdeveloped or developing, who are we comparing Africa's development to? Are we comparing Gabon's development to Ghana's development? Are we comparing South Africa's development to Libya's development? Or are we comparing the African continent's development to the West's development? The West development in which the West is able to develop as a result of the transatlantic slave trade, neocolonialism, and colonialism, as a result of the resources that are currently being stolen from Africa. So when we start to talk about African development, we have to address all of these issues. We can't just say HIV/AIDS is running rampant in the African continent and we must develop in order to address that contradiction. We have to take all of the contradictions that Africa is facing and put it in proper historical and geographical context. Quickly moving. When we look at Africa's development challenges, we generally think of the gross domestic product, right? So what is the gross domestic product for those of us who are not economists? I'm not really an economist, but I do a little bit of research. It's the total market value of all final goods and services produced in a country in a given year, equal to the total consumer investment and government spending plus the value of exports minus the value of imports. So Africa has the big five. We've got South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, Algeria, and Morocco. Now in the big five, be clear that people are still living on less than $2 a day. Although these 5 nations have the highest GDP on the African continent. But people still cannot eat every single day. People still don't have access to education, access to healthcare. People still don't have access to employment. So although you're the big 5, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're developed in an African context. The rest of Africa falls considerably below the big 5 regarding GDP. At the high level in 2010, you're looking at 36,000 in Equatorial Guinea, which I honestly think there's something wrong with that analysis, but I did do a quick research. And then $300 at the bottom. So you've got Equatorial Guinea at 36,000, and they're like at the top, and really there's only maybe 4 or 5 other countries that are about 14,000 in regards to GDP, and everyone else drops from like 2,500 on down to the low end of 300. Well, what in the world can anybody do with $300? Like an individual. We're not talking about the GDP of a nation. We're not talking about the worth of a nation. So when we are measuring Africa's development based on the GDP or the GNP, this is one-sided and does not really tell the whole picture. It talks about economic development based on Western analysis, based on a Eurocentric analysis of what development is. And it's not even about the ability and or the potential for economic development. It's about where you are in the world market, right? So it doesn't talk about the fact that your resources are being exported to other nations in order for their GDP to be high. It doesn't talk about the fact that the cell phones that we now operate are operated utilizing coltan, which comes out of the Congo. We just talked about the Congo right there, right? So it's not analyzing the Congo's GDP in relationship to the fact that one of their most precious resources is coming out of the Congo, and Samsung and all of these other, and iPhones and all of those, smartphones are utilizing that specific resource. So there's really no, in my opinion, there's really no justifiable reason why Africa's GDP and GNP should be so low if, in fact, you're looking at the natural resources on the African continent. Africa is a developing continent with many economic, social, and political challenges. Now look, the first thing I said was lack of democratic structures that involve the people in the decision-making process. Now many people say America's a democracy, right? Oh, America's a democracy, I can vote, one man, one vote, and all of a sudden, I live in a democratic society. And that is the electoral system in which we're going to push on Africa. So one man, one vote, but you still live on $2 a day. One man, one vote, but the majority of African people in the U.S. prison industrial complex the majority of people in the prison complex are of African descent. One man, one vote. They can't even get out and vote in the U.S. system. So is this system really democratic? If you have one man, one vote, do you have a say in where your government really goes? Do you have a say in your resources? Can you say that if I work at a Firestone plant, I can say this is what the profits should be used for? Absolutely not. So is it really a democracy? African development's challenge, political control is in the hands of neocolonialists generally. Although you have political independence, if you have political independence but your advisors come from France or Britain or the US, do you really have political independence? In Ghana, for example, when Ghana gained independence in 1957, they didn't have the personnel or the cadre in order to develop the Constitution, in order to do some of those critical things like be the economist, in order to put the government in the right shape, whether it's the education system or the economy, the health structure. So who they had to look to? Their former colonizers, the British. So even though I quote unquote have some political power, If the person behind the curtain is not of African descent and really is not concerned about Africa, then I really don't have political power. Economically, of course, we don't control the resources. And then socially, HIV, AIDS, poverty, malaria, there's infrastructure challenges, there's internal struggles over resources. And a lot of the challenges that you see on the continent right now, this fight for power is really a fight for land. It's a fight for resources. It's a fight so that your people, whoever your people happen to be, and you have more of allegiance to, can control more of the resources. We see it throughout the entire continent. We see it in Libya. It wasn't a fight for the people, the masses of people are not being treated properly, because Libya had the highest rated number of people who have university education. Libyans got a certain percentage of the oil profits. When Libyans had children, they got money in their bank account. They had access to housing. Regardless of what your position is, good, bad, or different about Gaddafi, to me that doesn't seem like the people are starving. But now the people are certainly fighting for resources right now, right, in Libya. I mean, I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know there. African nations are not collectively working to address some of these social, political, and economic challenges. You have very small nations that have high HIV/AIDS rates right next door to another nation that has high HIV/AIDS rates. To me, it's a no-brainer to address the contradiction of HIV/AIDS that's really coming from nation to nation. Because if you're a small nation that's bordering another small nation, do we not think that the HIV/AIDS is being transmitted across the borders? Poverty, malaria, all of these challenges African nations are not addressing. Development challenges manifest themselves in everyday lives in the majority of the African world. And so the problem becomes when there's development challenges so high that you cannot feed yourself and your family, you cannot really even become part and parcel of the process to transform the African continent. And then really, I mean, although this is an unsort of stated thing, the majority of development issues really stem from the fact that African nations they don't control the resources, both material and immaterial. So if you don't control your resources, you're not going to develop, particularly in this capitalist society where development is geared towards how much money you have. If you don't control your resources, which give you capital, you're not going to be able to develop any of these things. Quickly moving along, because I know we want to respect our time here. And then, of course, dependence on foreign aid, governance, external interference negatively impacts the ability for African nations to develop and advance. Internal capitalists. We have internal enemies in Africa. Just because you look like you're an African, it doesn't necessarily mean you're down with Africa. If you're more concerned with, being in cahoots with NATO or the imperialists or whoever else to come in and steal the oil out of Nigeria or Ghana or the coltan or the gold, you're not necessarily interested in developing Africa. You're interested in developing yourself and your pocketbook. And the people are not involved in the development process. In Ghana, for example, after the CPP, the Convention People's Party, and Kwame Nkrumah came into power, they really said that every Ghanaian must be part of this development process. So if you're a teacher, if you're a garbage person, if you are a market woman, if you are a doctor, and again, I'm not making this up, you can just do research with the development plans in Ghana, you have a role and responsibility to develop Ghana and Africa. They had a Ghana Young Pioneer Movement where they had all young people in Ghana had a right to be part and parcel of this movement. And they realized that it was their responsibility to not just defend Ghana, but also to defend Africa and to promote Pan-Africanism. And these young people were being trained to be, to run a navy, to do telecommunications, so that these industries, so they had the cadre that they needed in order to build the African continent. Right now, we don't have that. We don't have cadre that we need in order to build Africa. And the cadre that we do have that are of African descent that have access to, quote unquote, these hard skills don't necessarily live on the African continent. There's brain drain. You go to the US to get an education and you've been there for 45 years. I'm gonna retire in Africa, but you forgot everything about your skills. So what good are you really to Africa if you're in the US, right? And I know it's not that easy. I know it's a struggle to go back home and all that stuff, and there's some other challenges. But that is one of the reasons why we are struggling in regards to development. Quickly moving, keeping it moving. So what is scientific socialism? People get real scared about socialism. Whenever we say socialism, oh no, socialism doesn't work. Everyone has to wear like the same clothes. We have to like live in the same little house, and you're not going to let me speak my language, and I'm not going to be culturally appropriate. Blah 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 blah. Like let's throw all of that out the window. Really, what is socialism to me? I explain it like this: the people control the resources. So the people in a community who have access to resources, they make decisions about what they're going to use with those resources. So for example, if you're in Ghana and cocoa is the #1 resource, and you sell your cocoa at the world market, and cocoa is worth 200 barrels for you in order to make a profit for you to put that money back into building a school for your young people, and you sell it, you take that money and you put it back into a school. and you collectively decide where those extra profits go. That's really what it boils down to. It boils down to people having the right, the absolute right to make a decision about what economic system that they want to operate under. There's 5 real principles of socialism: democracy, egalitarianism, community public ownership of the means of production, and planning by the state for common purposes. And I want to talk about public ownership of the means of production. All of us have jobs somewhere, right? If you don't have a job in America, you're tied to the US dollar. But we don't have any relationship to our labor or to the mode of production. What I do with my labor, I have no say over it. What I produce, if I produce something at my job, they have intellectual rights. If I am a worker at McDonald's, I don't have absolutely any relationship to the food that's being cooked, the quality of the food, and where the profits go. I have no relationship I have a negative relationship actually to the mode of production, because I am not a producer. I am basically someone that helps the capitalist produce. And that's really what we need to change. Democracy, representatives of the socialist state must be answerable and responsive to the wishes of the people that they serve. Now, some people say that that's what the U.S. is, but it seems to me that many people in the U.S. are not necessarily responsive to the wishes of the people that they serve. Because you can vote someone into office wherever you are, and they can do what they want to do, and they, get all of this big cash, and then as a result, what happens? Nothing changes in your community. Egalitarianism, the belief of human equality in sharing the benefits of society in social, economic, and political affairs. Community, idea that social relations should be characterized by cooperation and collective belonging. We talked about public ownership, and then planning. So planning to meet the needs of the community. Oftentimes we think that there's no planning. In the capitalist world, there is planning. There's planning to keep us oppressed and exploited. We seem to think that the capitalists are not planning, but they are planning every single day. And we're going to quickly pass through this. So then, scientific socialism and Africa's development. So Africa's development is linked directly to the transformation of the capitalist economy. Why, if Africa develops and Africa becomes unified, what will Africa be? Africa will be the strongest, probably the strongest continent that can change the fate of the world. So of course, those imperialists don't want that to happen. Because if you're exploiting that continent that has the richest, the most natural resources, has a huge percentage of the population, if that continent becomes unified, it can change the fate of the world. And it also may put the West, not as the first world, but Africa and other non-European entities could potentially be first world continents or nations. African development has historically been halted and hindered as a result of the introduction of capitalism. We don't really know that. And the West is developed as a result of the underdevelopment of Africa. And really, how does Africa continue to be underdeveloped? Through the IMF, the World Bank, foreign nations controlling Africa. I mean, this is not new news. You get an IMF or World Bank loan, and you're told you have to decrease your currency. Well, if you decrease your currency, how are you going to utilize any extra currency that you may have in order to invest in healthcare or schools? But you have a high HIV/AIDS rate. It makes no sense to me. But if I devalue my currency, that's a serious issue. I was just in Ghana, and the U.S. dollar, if I gave $1 US, I got 2 CDs. When I was in Ghana in 2005, if I gave $1 US, I think I got like 1,500 CDs. Crazy inflation, crazy devaluing of currency. So of course, Ghana and other organizations, regional organizations, are trying to sort of address the currency issue. Development requires capital in order to invest in these infrastructures like schools, the economy, housing, roads, healthcare systems, jobs, political systems, food, and security. And a lot of times we think, oh, well, many of these developing nations, they have put in funds in order to have free public education. But the public education is unequal. Like in DC, for example, they're segregated, for all intents and purposes, they're segregated public education. Like none of the presidents who live, none of the U.S. presidents who live in the District of Columbia, none of their children go to DCPS. DC public schools. Why? Because the quality of education is so poor that they don't want their children to have to sit through that type of education process. So why do our children have to go through that? Economy, housing, all of these things. Development must include the masses of people. Each person must have the opportunity to contribute to developing in their community, nation, and the African continent. So for example, if you're a market woman, what is your role and responsibility to development? How are you going to use your skill in order to develop that specific community, which would then help to develop the larger city, which will help to develop that nation, which then will help to develop the African continent. If we don't think in those in that perspective, then we think that development comes from this sort of high-level government, then we're going to always be where we are today. And of course, we can talk about development all day long. If we don't control our resources, we have nothing to try to develop and control. Pan-Africanism practiced regionally and continentally will ease the challenges that small and medium-sized nations face. So when we're talking about controlling our resources, we must unify and unify ourselves as Africa and African people. Like if you're not going to roll to the world market and say, hey, I'm in Ghana and I have these barrels of cocoa and I want to sell them at $100. The world market comes back to you and say, I'll buy it for 50. What do? Do you sell it for 50 when you know it really costs 55 to make? And so if you sell it, you're taking the loss, and your cocoa farmers are then not able to eat or are not able to advance or send their children to school.
New theory. We can talk about the fall of the Berlin Wall, 1989, the end of the Cold War, even if we are still like in the stigma of the Cold War. And then we have the demise of the apartheid regime, and we have also the rise to power of Barack Obama. People, my sister here, we have a serious debate about that, and I'm glad that Campbell is here in the room. He wrote a wonderful book about that, and the book was what? Pan-Africanism in the age of Obama. Campbell.
Barack Obama, 21st century.
Yeah, but for change, right? Barack Obama, 21st century. Nice book, and he was talking about that historical factor of Obama's rise to power. Now, the crisis in Libya and in Ivory Coast, we spoke about that already. The Pan-African community was divided. Is here in this room, Dr. Campbell and myself. We have dissenting views on the crisis on the Ivory Coast. But there was a group of Pan-Africanists who believed that what happened to Gbagbo and what happened to Gaddafi, they needed to revolt, express their opposition, and organize. And then many of them are doing wonderful things here and there in order to see, the crisis of Libya and Ivory Coast as factors, that gave impetus to the Pan-African movement in the 21st century. Now, on the economical level, we need to see that the regional integration has always been part of world economic history. And then we move on. And I'm going to talk now about how Africans leaders, they try to implement like continental plans when we be talking about, for instance, economic integration. The major, they created the African Union. They are celebrating the 50th, the Golden Jubilee of the African Union. And then the major plan, 1980, called the Lagos Plan of Action, which we're talking about self-reliance and self-sufficiency. But 1 year later, the World Bank, which did not agree with what was in that document, which was adopted by many African leaders, produced what we call the Berg Report. And that Berg Report was putting emphasis on the comparative, the law of the comparative advantage, and which is about what? You produce, you buy, you maximize, your profits, buying what you cannot produce, right? And then at a cheaper price, and then you maximize money, and so that you can do your industrialization. And then when I talk about the law of comparative advantage, we need to know one more thing. When David Ricardo wrote this book, and then advanced the idea of the law of comparative advantage, he took an example about 2 European countries, Portugal and then England. But when today, the neoliberal policy makers, when they talk about the law of comparative advantage, and they are pushing Ivory Coast to sell its cocoa, to the international market, they are pushing all those African countries to sell the raw materials in the name of the law of comparative advantage. It is not what was written in the beginning. It was between 2 European countries. So adapting that law of comparative advantage to the context of the Pan-African vision, we will suggest, for instance, that Ivory Coast and Ghana, that are producing cocoa, come together and think about a common policy in order to promote like a really economic integration. Okay, we finish this one. Now, afterward, in 1991, they came with another treaty, Abuja. And this is funny here. They made a plan, they put a plan together, And then if you see, according to the way they want to do the plan, with the common market, we do this and this, and it was going to take 35 years from 1991. You can count, and you will see that we far from achieving the goals of the Treaty of Abuja. They came around 2002. They came with the New Economic Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD. We don't waste too much time. You go on the site, you will see that they were talking about a new plan, to propose development, but there was something they put in there that the objective of NEPAD was to enhance its full and beneficial integration into the world economy. Some people say, no, Africa is too divided, the countries are too weak, so if you want each African country to be integrated to the world economy, you are advancing the neoliberal agenda. And this again, African leaders are far from doing great things with that program. Now, this is just a quick history here. There's another program in 2003 conducted under the NEPAD program. We call it the Comprehensive Africa Development Program. And according to that program, it was about Africa-led growth, for poverty alleviation and hunger reduction. The target, 6% of annual agricultural growth in each country. And then they were urging African countries to allocate 10% of its budget to agricultural sector. 10 years later, we fast forward, less than 6 or 7 countries have met those goals. And then we know that 80% of the livelihoods in Africa live from agriculture, 60% of employment, and then Africa is still not able to feed itself. And today we are suffering from what? Land grabbing. I just mentioned the 125,000 acres of land sold by Alassane Dramane Ouattara, current president of Ivory Coast, to a corporation in a country which is food insecure like Ivory Coast. You go to Ethiopia, to different countries, that's the phenomenon now. And then those Europeans who subsidize the agriculture refuse that African leaders subsidize their own agriculture. And the former president of Malawi, I forgot his name quickly, what's his name? Mutharika, he had a serious problem with the European when he was trying to subsidize the agricultural sector in his country. Now, when we do all the things, we will see that the phenomenon of integrations in Africa is under the Western paradigm. And then Africa is still looking outward instead of looking inward. Now, when we talk about the regional grouping, quickly, you can see that the high transaction cost, 70% of value of export in agricultural sector, overlapping of groupings. We have SADC, we have West African Monetary Union, and there are many groupings. Even if the African Union said that they recognize only 8 of them, but there are many. The same leaders, they meet like in different groupings, with different custom unions policies, and at the end of the day, Africa is still representing less than 2% of world economy. And then we talk about the monopoly of the Western capital. Now, there's one thing that is very important, which is, according to the report issued by the United Nations report in 2004, that said that as African countries, the industrial products they put together, because they cannot sell them outside Africa, that the level of trade with regard to agriculture, to manufactured products in Africa was high. So it means that that's a sector that is promising in Africa, and if people develop a real industrial sector that is good and great, it is possible in order to accelerate the development of Africa. Okay, there is one thing I wanted to show quickly. Now, this is it. And when I was going through Dr. Campbell's book, he spoke about Ubuntu. Many today, my sister is socialist, and we are at the Left Forum. But the vision we try to promote, we want to distance ourselves right from the fight between capitalism and socialism. And we want to promote an African philosophical concept, which is what Ubuntu. A man is a man through, a person is a person through other person. It's about sharing, it's about compassion, it's about all those things. And now you can see like what Chekata called the cultural and linguistic unity. You can see beside the Akan people where they call it Biakoye, or the Yoruba Ajobi, But in Shangaan, we call that Numuhu. Benda, Vunhu. And Tsonga, we call that Bunhu. In Kosa, we call that Umtu. In Shona, we call that Nuhu. In Kiswahili, we call that Utu. And then in Uganda, we call that Abantu. You have that the same sonority of the Umtu, which is about person. So this because that's a philosophical system which put together the Bantu people of Africa. So we think that as capitalism is failing, and socialism has not produced, the result it pretend like it wanted to produce, for the development of Africa. It is good to work away from those two systems and come with a new concept. And this is what we try to do here. And check out that job. Now we went through that already. But there is one thing I wanted to talk quickly, and I will stop about yes. Now. In the way we see it, that the vision we're trying to promote will be able to sustain growth and enhance mutual trade attraction of African countries and consolidate interdependent self-help. That is very important. Self-help, self-sufficient, and self-reliant and cohesive and humanistic communities. Like when we're trying to talk about this new vision. Nkrumah proposed a need for an overall economic plan, for the development of Africa. And my sister said it. Today, Ivory Coast will do what it wants to do. Ghana will do what it wants to do. Those two countries produce cocoa. Kenya will do anything what it has to do with coffee. And then Rwanda with coffee. But they do not come together. And they're talking about Nepal and all those things. And if there is a need for those countries to come together. And according to experts, the way we're going with the development pace in Africa, we're going to reach the United Nations Millennium Goal by 2065. We will be dead. Some of us will have reincarnated in other bodies, and then Africa will still be where it is. Now, okay. Now, here, quickly, this is one thing we need to know. Because when you talk about Pan-Africanism and New Vision, people may say, oh, but Nyaka is a dreamer. So how are we going, to translate, those things in a practical way? It is simple. I read that in a small book written, by somebody, that the policy will be in Africa that you grow food to eat and feed your community. So if we have a greater number of Africans who decide, for instance, to grow food to eat and feed the community, in line with the spirit of Ubuntu, that a person is a person through other person, we will be solving an issue, as we know the importance of agriculture in the field of development. Second, Cheikh Anta Diop spoke about the energy doctrine in Black Africa, how it is important for African countries in order to develop functional integration so that they can sustain industrialization in Africa. We need to do this, and then if it is difficult to have money, for instance, to do the hydropower with the River of Congo, which represents 30% of the Africa fresh water, and we come to that, at least, even if we don't have the power to go to the moon, we can at least try and subdue the rays of the sun and develop renewable energy around solar power. That it is possible, and if we can do that, we can take the example of Germany, where people have developed like a solar power at a level, and it is controlled not by corporation like in America, but it's controlled by communities and by individuals. That's the same system we need to do in Africa. And if there are some people in the room here who are business people, who are business-oriented people, that is something people can do, and then they can empower the communities, and people can share the fees of that solar power in the African rural area. And then, of course, they can also integrate other things. And so I'm going to stop there, not to take too much time. And if there's some question, I will answer. Thank you very much.
Eva, I'm going to be really formal. If you have any questions, just state your name and where you're from. Just raise your hand. Yes, sir.
My name is Ibrahim. I'm from Philadelphia. My question is, Dr. Nyaka, do you think that Africans are not aware of the importance of Pan-Africanism
That's the question. I think that people will get there, right? People will get there. We try. We have some elders, and I mentioned Dr. Campbell. There are, Dr. Kokora. People wrote the Nkrumah, and then this is the task of our generation, to try and then revive Pan-Africanism, and to try and then make sure that African people understand, right, that the only way for us to survive, we have to develop a culture and a vision of unity. I did not get a chance to go through my PowerPoint because it's long, and I want us to have this conversation. But the United States, when they put together the colonies in 1776, they gave the Declaration of Independence. In the beginning, there were 13 colonies. In Europe, in the beginning, there were 3 European countries, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. 50 years later, today, there are 27 European countries in the European Union, right? And then 2 major contributions of the American civilization, right? First is about the idea of unity, and second is about the idea of democracy, when many European countries were still under the yoke of monarchy. So by doing what we're doing, by engaging this conversation, our people can catch the idea.
Follow up?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. The reason why I asked this question is that it's obvious that Pan-Africanism is a good thing, and I think that Africans know that it is important for them to be together in unity in order to attain the goal of development. But you did not stress enough on the fact that there's an obstacle that is preventing African countries or African leaders from reaching that goal. It's not because they don't know that Pan-Africanism can help, but there's an obstacle which is very important. The fact that the Western civilization pose as a role model and are trying to prevent African countries from reaching the goal, which can maybe allow African countries to get free from their imperialism. So can you stress? Can you please stress on that? Because we know that the African countries are aware of the importance of Pan-Africanism, but there's something that is preventing them from reaching that goal. What is that thing?
So I think it's twofold. I think one, quite frankly, all Africans don't believe that Pan-Africanism is a solution. I think that there are some African heads of states, as well as Africans, who have bought into the fact that capitalism and sort of rampant individualism is the way towards Africa's development. We took a course with a professor who shall remain nameless, and we were talking about developments in Africa. And one of the things that she said was, well, Africa's not developed because capitalism has not taken full root in Africa, right? And I kid you not, that's exactly what she said in an African Studies department. So I think it's twofold. I think one, I think that when we think about the decisions that we make in regards to the way forward for Africa, we have to understand that we make those decisions based on the ideology. Ideology being the principles that guide our decisions. And much of that ideology stems from this capitalist society in which we live in. And so many Africans who are making those decisions, they're making those decisions really, in my opinion, as capitalists who are interested in their own sort of forward movement. Now, that's one piece. The second piece is, I think that it's a no-brainer. You know if you're struggling and your neighbor's struggling, or there's 50% of your community has HIV/AIDS, and if you came together, perhaps you would be able to eradicate some of these challenges, whether it's through education, whether it's through community growing of gardens, whatever the case may be. And you're absolutely correct. The reality is that the imperialists don't want Africa to unify, because if Africa unifies, what will happen? That Africa will be able to then defend herself and her people. So therefore, the imperialists are real tricky. They slide up and they say, in Djibouti, we're going to put a military base where you can fly the drones, and those drones can then fly throughout Africa and then kill particular specific people who are sort of opponents of imperialism. imperialists say, let's organize the Central African Command and let's roll up on a country and put a big AFRICOM base there. And the only country that said that they would allow the base there is Liberia. Your girl, President Johnson, and you know what AFRICOM say? We're good. You don't have enough resources and land for us to come. Can you imagine? You're welcoming AFRICOM to your nation and they're saying, no, we don't want to come there because you don't have enough resources and you're not strategically placing enough for us. Something is kind of wrong with that picture. Anyway, it's a whole other story. So there are these international bodies which are operating inside of Africa that are doing just that, holding us back from being unified. Not only we're talking about AFRICOM, we're talking about the IMF and World Bank. How many billions of dollars does Africa owe to the IMF and World Bank? We can't get out from under paying interest to the IMF and World Bank. So if my choice is to get another loan in order to feed my people to import rice because I'm not growing rice, right? But we have the largest level of agriculture in one of the largest, areas where we can actually feed our people. Something's wrong with that. But guess what? If you don't bring in rice and you don't bring in bread, what will happen? There'll be rice, there'll be bread, there'll be folks fighting because they can't feed their children. And so I think that many of these institutions that are being funneled through the West, and we talked about NAPAD. Who is the number one sponsor of NAPAD? Where do they get their money from? Anybody?
Yeah, from them.
From who? The U.S. Right? So you have NAPAD that's supposed to be this economic body, this regional economic body that's supposed to be talking about economic developments in Africa, but the U.S. is funding the majority of NAPAD. So if you're giving me money every single day to live, I'm going to make all the decisions that you direct me to make. Why? Because you're going to pull your purse back, right? And so I think that those are some of the major challenges to overcoming Pan-Africanism. And lastly, if I may, and I apologize for going on for a long time, but lastly, if I may, when we start to talk about Pan-Africanism, we cannot look at heads of states and these governments because Kwame Nkrumah Kwame Nkrumah said we need an organization of African unity. Kwame Nkrumah did not go to the inaugural meeting of the OAU. Why? He said he did not go because he said that this body should not just be made up of heads of states. Pan-Africanism must be a mass movement. It must be organized through organizations, but it must be a mass movement. And the problem on the African continent and throughout the African world is that our people are struggling so much to eat every single day that, quite frankly, Pan-Africanism is not in the front of their mind. Because if you are out, like when I was just in Ghana, you got sisters 13 years old selling pure water on their head from sun up to sundown, and the only thing they can do is sleep for 3 hours and come up sundown again. Sun up to sell pure water. Is that child thinking about Pan-Africanism? She's thinking about selling that pure water for 20 CDs so she can buy some more pure water the next day so she can buy some food to make water. I'm finished.
Okay. Yeah, of course. Okay, we were in the first room, right?
Yes.
Okay, we do not want to, we need to go faster, but you can read this here, right? When I did the wheel of imperialism, you saw the wheel, all those branches, they put together, to maintain African countries that are under a system of oppression. I haven't even seen this, and then one day I was doing some research and I found out on YouTube on the wrong title, but it summarizes everything we can talk about. That Nkrumah said that the forces arrayed against us are, and I use the word most carefully, formidable, to use his accent. They operate in worldwide combinations at all levels: political, economic, military, cultural, educational, social, and not all through intelligence, cultural, and information services. So if we have a world system that is against those African, the African continent of the people of African descent, or the African leaders, so do you think that an individual can stand by himself against such system and then prevail and survive? No. So that's why the logic will be for us to come together, like in the vision of Pan-Africanism, and as our leaders, if they have so many interests, which are not always the interests of the people, then it is the regular people, the regular citizens. So we come together. That's why when I talk about this beautiful poem I read by Alice Walker, right? When Gandhi said that be the change you want to see. We're talking, yes, Babo Shul, Babo Shul, and then this president is not doing what he's supposed to do, or Kwame Nkrumah did that. They tried, and they have the missteps, and they have their contributions. But today, each of us, we should have in mind that we want to be the change we want to see. And in line with the Pan-African vision, we need to embody the values of solidarity and unity. And then that poem of Alice Walker says that when life descends into the pit, right, I must become my own candle, burning myself willingly, right, to light the darkness around me. So if each of us, we understand that we have to light our own candle, then my brother, we're going to bring more light and more vision, and then certainly, we can give a new cause, to world history.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Bayi. I come from Boston. What I wanted to basically say is when Dr. Nyaka was talking about like the energy from the River Congo, I used to work in energy in the Ivory Coast back in the 80s, 90s. And we had a plan like that would produce energy from the River Congo and basically be able to supply energy up to the Sahara Desert. Only Nigeria was not able to be sure that it would secure the power lines. That's why that did not happen. So we as intellectuals, when a government says, okay, this project that all the African nations came together to come up with, it is not going to be feasible simply because we cannot secure the lines. We as intellectuals, what do we say for that to come to fruition? So I mean, I have a question for you guys. Because it's easy to always say that it's the West. And I know it's the West, basically prevented us from being free and doing what we want to do and becoming what we want to become. But at least that's going to be a minimum that we can do. And even if we have to die while doing that, we should do that. So we as intellectuals, what do we do?
Just very briefly, I think that this is just my humble opinion. I think intellectualism is like overrated, right? So I think that when we say, us as intellectuals or us who have PhDs, my position, anybody can get a PhD. All you need a little time and some perseverance, right?
Yeah. And
maybe you can butter somebody's hands. So that's A. I think B. I think that what's gonna tip the scale is it the people. And sometimes we have to take those risks. Like you said, we may have to die for what we believe in. Sometimes we've got to take the risk to say, you know what, as somebody in the government, perhaps I should. And again, this is a risk that you have to individually make a decision. If this is the risk you're gonna take, right? Whether you're gonna put your life on the line or not. Well, if this is something that can categorically shift Africa towards Pan-Africanism, you might just have to be the one to leak that information to the masses. And when the masses step up, as we saw in Venezuela, it can happen, right? With the attempted coup of Chavez in 2002, the masses can turn the tide. So I think that's a struggle, brother, that happens probably every single, like right now somebody's probably struggling about that on the African continent, about how do we sort of categorically change the conditions in which we're living in. And I think that really the reality is that we as intellectuals must take our resources and expose those folks who don't have access to those resources so they have the resources, can make an educated decision, we can collectively move to push for the change that we want to see.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, Campbell?
Yes, I hope I can make a few comments.
Please do.
Yes. I just want to bring to you the excitement that I shared in Addis Ababa when Africa celebrated 50 years of history. And it's important that we celebrate and we speak about this, because what the Pan-African movement has shown, it is the most successful movement for the past 150 years. It is the only movement that has been around that long that is still providing leadership in the world. Where did the Pan-African move come from? the Pan-African movement comes from the global African family, and I learned in Addis Ababa, we don't call our brothers and sisters overseas the diaspora anymore. They are part of the global African family. And our brothers and sisters in Brazil, in Ecuador, in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Colombia, Uruguay, they are the driving force now behind us carrying out the Durban Declaration. What is the Durban Declaration? The transatlantic slave trade constituted a crime against humanity, and there can be no reorganization of the world economy until we accept that fact, that the transatlantic slave trade presented that problem for humanity. So I think Pan-Africanists have to get behind the program of Durban, because this thing called NEPAD, the New African Initiative, was an answer of Europe to block the reparations discussion about slavery. Now, thankfully, Europe is finished. I can tell you that Africa is in the driver's seat. I just finished a book called Global NATO and the Catastrophic Failure in Libya. I have only 4 copies, and if you have a small donation, I'll take it down. But this was a turning point, because Europe is finished. Europe does not have the financial, economic, the political resources to dominate Africa. I'll give you one example. In this meeting of the UNESCO, of writing the general history of Africa, the French was trying to blackmail UNESCO about what goes into this book. The Brazilian government intervened and said, we will finance the writing of the general history of Africa because we will have 100 million Africans in Brazil and we want them to learn the history of Africa. So the impact of Brazil, Russia, China, and these countries have turned the tables on the West. So what is our job? What is our job given this new situation? Number one, our job is to work for unity right now. That is, we cannot wait for African unity. That means we cannot support any kind of divisions in Africa based on race, ethnicity, region, religion, and so forth, because that is what will hold us back. Number two, we need a common currency, because we cannot keep our money in the dollar when the money is being devalued based on the international financial crisis. And so we have to move very fast towards a common currency. Thirdly, what my brother said here is very correct. We have to have an energy program for Africa that unites the energy grid, and we will use different grids. 100 years ago, Nikola Tesla came up with wireless energy. What will happen in Africa is solar technology will do for energy what mobile cell phones has done for telecommunication. Africa is in a revolutionary period. There is no continent that will touch Africa in the next 20 years. We have the resources, we have the people, we have the political history. What we have to do is get the word out and do not allow our differences to stop us from working toward African unity. Those are the few points I wanted to make. And I'll take a donation for those who want a copy of this book.
Please, I just want to add one thing to your list. I think that I agree, common currency, the energy program, but I think we really need to stabilize our agricultural, and I think that is not necessarily the number one piece, but my brother here oftentimes speaks about food security, and I think that if we can feed our people, like really, we don't necessarily, life will be great, and having modern sort of technology is fabulous, but if we have enough food to feed our folks every single day, then I think that we have a chance of sort of transitioning to the next level. But when we don't have food security and we're depending externally on food security, all that other crap that we import, we don't need none of that. But we do need rice, and we do need bread. And I think that if we're looking at transitioning the African continent over the next 10, 15, 20 years, I think that we need to really push African nations to begin to slowly decrease their dependency on food security coming from externally and having internal food security. So that if the IMF says you must do X, Y, and Z in order to take this loan, we can say, you know what, we don't need your loan because we have enough agricultural land in order to feed our people. And we may have no lights and our telecommunication system may be down, but at least folks are having 3 meals a day.
I just,
Pardon me.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Dr. Campbell. And you know, because when a continent like of Africa is confronted to so many challenges, you know, sometimes when people will tell you, you know, the challenges are so huge, that, you know, from where, you know, we start, you know, what is the beginning? So how do we do it? Right? So when you do research, and then you read, and then you have professors like Dr. Campbell, then you know, Dr. Kokora, or many other, then you will realize that, I won't say that it is a shortcut, but there is a way to start. So all the people who did industrialization in the world, they were able to feed themselves. If you go and talk about, you read about Japan, like how, you know, Japan, they became self-sufficient. It is not what the Europeans are trying to do today, whereby they want, you know, with those big corporations with huge land. It was like a family acre, like farms, like maybe 1 or 2 acres, and then a family has it. And then here, you know, she taught me that here there was like the Victory Garden in America. So you have like you are maybe a family can have 1 or 2 acres. As you know, each family learns to feed, you know, her members, right? And then, you know, if we don't want them to go and build the project, the Inga project, maybe more than $100 billion. But at least with solar power, if and that you say that you work in the field of energy, that's the future. That's the future for Africa. And 10 years ago, it was expensive, you know, to try and develop solar power. But today, with the Chinese involvement, for instance, in that sector, with what the Germans are doing in Germany, if you go there, if you read, you will see that if we try to do the same thing in Africa, and we can do that through different groups. It can be church members, it can be people who are part of a co-op, it can be people who are in a village. People can share that, because if you want to go through the leaders of the state, it's going to become complicated. But on at the level, the way we organize and we do rallies, we can also engage our people, you know, to do that. Now, to talk about the solar power, this is it. And Sheikh Anta just gave you know, you want the data, the facts, it is there. That according to like a German company, like in theory, I say in theory, if people can have a plant the size of Connecticut, right? They can produce electrical power for 500 million. You see here, they did not say Africans, they say Europeans. They're doing the research, and by 2020, they're going to, if we are still sleeping, and I will come back to your question, if we are still sleeping, they will control again the same way they control our resources. They will develop solar power in Africa, and then we're going to become the consumers, you know, of the sun that shines on the continent of Africa. And they even thought about building a 12,000 submarine Mediterranean line that they want to build to take solar power from Africa to Europe, right? And like it is here, the technology exists, right? And then people who have the knowledge, they can just do it if the African leaders are not doing that. But we are far from that. That's why we organize those conferences, you know, so that, you know, we can try and tell people that it is possible. We may not be able to go to the moon, we may not be able to go to Mars, but at least we can subdue the rays of the sun that shines on the continent of Africa to produce solar power in order to sustain the industrialization of the continent of Africa, and then support agriculture on the continent of Africa so that we can feed ourselves. This is what I want to say. So it's on us. It's on us.
Can I just add one more thing? I'm so sorry, but the other thing I just thought about is, like, I think that we also need to unify with like other peoples who are fighting the same enemy. I mean, Latin America is hot right now in regards to, you know, addressing imperialism. You know, why do we not have, you know, continent to continent relations? Whether you're talking Venezuela, Cuba, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you've got an embargo on Cuba, you've got the same situation in Zimbabwe. You know, how can we not only learn lessons, but also begin to barter for some of the resources that we don't currently have in order to sort of advance Africa. And particularly if you're negotiating with, and I forget the documentary South of the Border, I'm sure everyone here has seen it, but I forget the one nation, I want to say it's not Paraguay, but that might be Paraguay, that basically paid off all their IMF and World Bank loans, and when they were going to pay them off, they said, oh, you don't want to get any more loans?
Argentina.
No. Argentina, yes. Oh, no, we're good. We don't want any more loans. You know, how do we negotiate and how do we work in solidarity with our sisters and brothers in Latin America and other places that are also fighting the same fight? Because I think that at the end of the day, if Africa is at a place where we're kind of struggling to get over that hump, we have folks who are transitioned over the hump, we're more powerful when we begin to roll up on the World Bank or the IMF or the capitalists or whoever, the corporations of the West, whatever.
Any more questions? Okay, then our panel, yes.
I have one question.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Ms. Sapa.
Yeah, it's very easy and great that all of intellectuals have a solution for the conflict that you have for the energy and other things we have in the Middle East. But the main issue we have and our main obstacle we have is imperialism. This is the one that doesn't let us to have what we want. And what do you have plans for this? And do you have any plan to work with African Americans here to get support, their support for your struggle? First of all, for your struggle to get rid of imperialism, first become independent, then
Okay. I can say, you know, one thing you did not say that I'm going to, the way I hear it, there are two things, right? First, you know, those intellectuals, they come with big ideas, you know, they're not concrete, they just talk, and at the end, you know, they don't provide real solutions. That's the first thing I heard. The second, it's like you think that you may not be thinking about how to try and bring a solution to the problems caused by imperialism.
Get freedom.
None. Okay, but I said it again, I'm going to say it, right? To say that again. When you read world history, when you read about the beginning of the world, the mightiest or the most powerful always oppress the weak in the world. That's a law of nature and law of human interaction, law of human relations. Is about everywhere you go. So Africans, they were killing each other, and you will see Europeans killing each other. You will see that in Asia, among Arabs. When they did it, when you guys, if you're Muslim, when they found the religion, they went to Africa and they did all those holy wars. This is the world. So you will always see people who are going to oppress other people. Right? In this room, if all of us we agree that, for instance, we don't want any other person to come here, and then we decide to choose a chief right here as we speak. And if it is you, the way I see you, you may turn into a dictator. Right? Because you love prestige, you know, you want to control your power. This is part of the human nature. So now, how do we stop it? Because the Europeans, you know, when many other people were not thinking about to control the whole wide world, they did it and they put into place a system. What can we do? We have two choices. Either we accept that they're so powerful, you know, that there is no way we can do anything, or we know that they're so powerful, but we believe that if each of us tries, to do the right thing, it is possible, to turn the tide. I am for the latter, because today, to talk about the crisis in Ivory Coast, when I was giving interviews, I know some of my friends are very afraid. They thought that the CIA was going to come after me or the FBI. Maybe they have my name, but I was not threatened at all. But why people thought that the CIA will come after me? Because they internalized the fear that if you talk Pan-Africanism or you talk imperialism, then the West is going to come and crush you. I may die tomorrow, but I'm still alive, right? So, and she's still alive, and she's still alive, and so all of us. So this is what we need to do. So that's why I was talking about that poem, that when life descends into the pit, right, I must become my own candle, burning myself willingly to turn the light around me. If you do that, if I do this, and other people do that, then we can bring change. In the 60s, when we talk about Kwame Nkrumah, sometimes we don't picture, the context in which those people, that they became president of the country. Sometimes we cannot picture that. We're talking about Cold War. And we're talking about an African guy who was here, who went to Ghana, and at that moment, and he said that he was claiming to be socialist, and talk about the unity of Africa. But the guy survives, he was in power for 14 years. He had his mistake. They made him fail in some areas, but today the vision of Kwame Nkrumah is still alive. And we are trying to build upon that vision. You see what I'm saying? So, and then Professor Campbell said it. It is over for Europe. Brazil, in the next 5 or 10 years, Brazil wants to be the 5th most important economy in the world. China is bailing out all the European nations. And America today is under China on the economical level. And there is no way America can dare do a war against China. Because they just have to take, the bonus of the population, 300 million. They put that here somewhere by Florida, Cuba, and finish all of us. Right? This is the environment in which we are. So if we don't have the eyes, to see that there is change happening in the world, my brother, we may even miss this opportunity. Right? So we are not talking like in vain, right? What you see, I said it is maybe theoretical, but if you feed yourself, you feed your family, right? I feed myself and I feed my family. Instead of going into those long, big corporations, I have 1 acre of land, right? Instead of doing rubber, right, to make money. And Dr. Kokora was talking about that if we decide, for instance, to grow banana to feed ourselves, and brother, this is the beginning of Pan-Africanism that we want to see. Like Thomas Sankara said it, they asked him what is imperialism, and he gave the wonderful definition. He said imperialism, that's the food you eat, that the food that you have in your plate, that's imperialism. Because the food does not come from Africa, because we may produce it, but we are consumers on our continent. So Pan-Africanism in the 21st century will be what? You feed yourself, you feed your neighbor. Your brothers and your sisters keeper. And you support your brother, you support your sister in the unity and solidarity. Right? Tonight is an example of people coming together. Many Ivorians are here. You can imagine black people working together. So difficult, but here they're here tonight. We can do it. This is what we're trying to do. And we will do it, my brother. And we shall overcome.
And can I just add something too? I mean, I think that when we talk about imperialism is like the boogeyman in the room, like the big elephant, and we have to just kill. We feel like we're just gonna kill imperialism all at one shot. Like it's not gonna happen. B, I think this current capitalist system took many years in order to build, right? So we didn't just all of a sudden we were chilling one day on the continent, and then we got took, and then here we are, and it didn't happen like that. I mean, there was a progression. We know that we started with communalism. We moved to then some aspects of slavery, to mercantilism, blah 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 blah, that led us to where we are. So I think that there's that. We have to put that into a both political and historical context. That the imperialism in which we are dealing with now is so advanced because it has evolved over history. So that's A. So what does that tell us? It tells us that our response must also evolve. Our response must evolve from and Kwame Ture always says, you have the individual who influences the family, who influences the community, who influences society. So our response to imperialism must influence the individual, who influences the family, who influences the community, who influences society. That's A. I think B, I think your point about intellectuals sort of coming in and pushing their position and like living in these big houses and all that is great, which is why I said to the brother's response right here, it's, being an intellectual is like overrated. But at the end of the day, there were some great quote unquote intellectuals that moved us to where we are. W.B. Du Bois was an intellectual. Marcus Garvey was an intellectual. Kwame Nkrumah was an intellectual. And when the brother brings up Kwame Nkrumah here, my man, after his first year at Lincoln University, was selling fish because he didn't have no place to live. Him and his buddy couldn't even sell the fish to eat, right? So this is the brother here who you're thinking, wow, could this brother actually transition and be the head of state? And it happened in a 10-year period. And that's because he hooked up with the right folks and had the correct vision. And two more quick things I want to point out. I think that oftentimes the challenge that we have, not just as intellectuals, but just those of us who prophesize about this all the time, is that we prophesize about it in our own house with some incense and some wine, and we're not in the company of our collective. We're not in Pan-African organizations. We're not in organizations that are socialist or that are progressive, whatever the case may be. We come to the Left Forum, we come to these events, we talk about it, blah, 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 and all year round, we're not really doing anything to promote and advance Pan-Africanism. And in my opinion, that's the wrong approach. Like, how many folks in this room are in a permanent organization that's trying to push Pan-Africanism, right? The brother here, I'm in one. I mean, we got a lot of people in this room, right? So those of us who have access to these resources, we not only have to espouse them, but we have to utilize them to build mass movements and mass organizations that can move us to the next level. And then two pieces I just want to say quickly. I don't know if I agree with you about the whole that, it's human nature to oppress. Like, I feel like that's social construction, and I feel like our ideology pushes up, derives our social construction, right? And so the ideology of society promotes how in which people treat other people in society. Now, in recent history, absolutely, we've had the oppressed and the oppressors, but I think that if Africa at all is going to be able to survive over the next 100 years or 200 years, we are going to have to change that social construction and change that ideology. And then absolutely lastly, I think we have to make our own contribution every single day. As I was on the mega bus from DC, I woke up early in the morning and I was like, Lord have mercy, I gotta go all the way to New York to this presentation. Instantly, out of nowhere, I said to myself, I love Africa and I am indebted to Africa, right? But if I did not realize that my contribution here today is somehow advancing us towards Pan-Africanism, then I wouldn't be doing my job. And so I think at the end of the day, it's all of our responsibility to then advance Pan-Africanism and the Pan-African movement. And we cannot be discouraged because we don't see Pan-Africanism in our lifetime. Because Kwame Nkrumah came and went. Kwame Ture came and went. Marcus Garvey came and went. This one, that one, the next one, the next one. I will come and go. And we may not see Pan-Africanism. But I hope that the contribution that I make will move us to the next level. So if I say nothing here today, I strongly recommend that people join an organization. And if you don't find one that you like, start an organization that's moving us towards achieving Pan-Africanism and really to achieving a different world. Because once Africa is unified, this world will not look the same.
Just a comment. I agree with you that the large
Your name and where you from?
here, Tabia, Boston. I think of what it takes for us to advance Africa, to advance the philosophy, the African philosophy, education. So we think by fighting the imperialism, we don't have the need to fight it. And we take the definition, we can apply the definition by Thomas Sankara, simple definition. And then we can spin it around. That what do you call imperialism is the food that you eat and it didn't grow.
Yeah.
So what does that tell me? That means I have to do my own food. I have to make my own clothes, or buy my own clothes that are made in Ivory Coast and in Ghana. Not clothes imported from Europe, where I'm wearing now. That's simple. So I think what we need is educate our own people. That's what it takes. educate our own people that this is what we can do to change things around. This is what we should do. Very simple. Education and also compulsory education in our individual society. Not allowing young kids in the street corners begging for money. We should do away with that. If all the laws can set us back more. So it takes education. The definition is simple definition of imperialism. Everybody should understand that and we should do. I think we move forward.
Any other questions or comments?
Always a comment, but
Make it short. Make it short.
All right, we'll have our closing remarks. Dr. Indiana?
Oh, okay. I have three simple things. One, we are all part and parcel of the Pan-African movement. We should never underestimate our role and the power that we have as African people and people who love Africa. That's one. Two, please join an organization that is constantly, every single day, doing something to advance Pan-Africa. And three, I think that those of us who have direct or indirect connection to the African continent and African governments, we need to urge folks in order for us to start to grow our own food. We've heard it, and we've heard it. When you feed your people will be behind you. If your people have nothing to eat, they will look to those folks who bring them bread. If we can provide the bread, they will then back you, and they will see that this is the right direction. So we must be the change agent in our own community everywhere we are. And the fourth thing that I want to say, which I don't think is emphasized enough, we need to go, if we are saying that Pan-Africanism is the direction for Africa, I'm sorry, sisters and brothers, but we are sitting in the wrong place. We need to be having these conversations on the African continent because Africa is primary. That's not negating Africans in the diaspora. That's not negating, what did we say it was? The new
Global African family.
the global African family. That's not negating the global African family, but as the brother here spoke about China, this is my very last thing, although it's my conclusion, but the brother spoke about China. How many Chinese folks in America are locked up? What's the percentage? Do we even know? We don't know. How many Chinese folks around the world have leverage, are oppressed by nations? Not that many, right? Why? Because China controls their land and resources. So in order for our people, wherever we are, to be free, we have to control our land and resources. So Africans who have access to these resources, and those resources being material and immaterial, we need to take it back home to unify in order to have the land and Mother Africa be free to protect the people around the world.
So my conclusion, I think that as the sons of Africa, we might remember.
What about the daughters?
Did I say?
You said sons. What about the daughters?
I was
In the African language, there's no gender.
I was going to come to
You're
that.
coming, I know.
But then it will be so awkward that I start and I say, the daughters of Africa. Anyway, as the sons and daughters of Africa, we have to know that in our blood, right, in our veins, runs the blood of people who survived slavery, people who survived colonialism, and people who survived apartheid. So if our forefathers could survive, those three and racism, those four systems of oppression over centuries, I think that if with a little bit of organization in the 21st century, if we understand that Pan-Africanism should be our political religion, and then we embrace the Pan-African vision, and then we accept that we need to be the change we want to see, and then that we embody, and then we represent the values of unity and solidarity, and that we reduce our weaknesses within us as individuals and in the midst of our communities. And then if we understand that those who tried yesterday that maybe they did not have the opportunities, we have today, right? Today, they can stay here in this room, and I've never seen that, Mjiba, you can correct me. We can stay here, this maybe in a room, and have a Pan-African global village through Skype and discuss about Pan-Africanism. But guess what? And at this, I will agree with you, my brother Abayi. Even though we know that imperialism is against us, but the primary thing that divides us, I think that is not imperialism. It is our own weaknesses. This is what I believe. Because we are in the DC area, my sister and I, we are trying to bring the Pan-African movement to come together in a Pan-African coalition. But ego, competition, jealousy, individualism, all those weaknesses put together cause the weakness of the Pan-African community in the Washington DC area and in the world. So for me, even before we think about how to go against imperialism, we need to get rid of those weaknesses. If Demba Traore is doing something, if we need to support him so that he can be successful, we support Demba. We don't need to love Demba. If Erike D is doing something, we don't need to love Erike D. And we need to make plans to support Demba and Erike D as if we were doing an activity for ourselves. If we haven't reached that level, I will be here in 500 years talking about Pan-Africanism. Now, on the level of economics now, there are many things we can do, seriously, right? If today, there are some people who decide, for instance, to do the assessment of the resources of those African countries, you will be surprised. It is the Europeans, they are the one who knows what we have as resources in Africa. Just to put together a database. In Ivory Coast, I can tell you, we do not have like a database about the resources and the potential of our country. If they exist, it was done by the Europeans. And maybe the president, be Gbagbo, Alassane, or Houphouët-Boigny, they have an idea. And even if when they have an idea, they cannot use the full potential of the resources. Because if you do that, like Houphouët-Boigny said one day, oh yeah, people say, why did you not transform cocoa? He said, no, if I did that, the French, they won't let me do that. So that's why I did not do it. He said that in an interview. Sometimes we don't know, the problem our leaders have. Sometimes we don't know. And then I'm tired of hearing Africans criticizing the leadership all the time, while themselves they're sitting in their living room and they don't do anything consistent. Right? So it is time, we need to stop blaming people. Kagame cannot become overnight an angel, that's not possible. And Blaise Compaoré cannot become Thomas Sankara. Right? But if we do, we are sincere, maybe in the 21st century, in our midst, there will be Jomo Kenyatta of the 21st century, Thomas Sankara in the 21st century. We can have Kwame Nkrumah in the 21st century. We can have Garvey of the 21st century. This is what we need to think about. And if they did it, then we can do it. And this is the only way we can survive in this world. That's my conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congress.
Round of applause for the moderator.
Yes.
No.